The economic boom of the 20s overall resulted in the Great Depression. Overproduction was the very beginning of the economic decline. Due to the expansion of factories that had risen during World War I, Canada was allowed to overproduce goods during the 1920s. Factory owners, aware of the overproduction, slowed the workflow in their factories and made workers lay off from their jobs to avoid a stockpile. As a result, workers had less to spend on buying goods from the amount of money they were paid. The export of valuable staple products such as minerals, timber, and crops were greatly relied on in Canada. Canada depended on other countries to buy their exports for the economy to continue standing strong. The United States bought 40% of Canada's exports, meaning that Canada's economy would be affected if the American economy declined or rose. Canada depended so much on staples, which were often exported to other countries, that any decline in foreign economies also hurt its own economy. The United States, Australia, and Argentina were the main competition of Canada in crop sales. As a result, Canadian farmers were left with an unsold excess of wheat, causing prices to drop dramatically. Farmers working in the prairies, aka the Dust Bowl, faced many droughts over several summers in a row, resulting in numerous crops dying. With no wheat to export through shipping and flour to be ground, flour mills and railways lost business. This caused a chain reaction in many parts of the Canadian economy. The stock market was created because companies wanted to expand but needed more money to do so. In addition, economic protectionism and tariffs were implemented by the U.S., which caused countries like Canada to protect their industries through tariffs. To get the money that they needed, a company would sell stocks, as well as their shares of the company to the public. Investors who bought shares would receive a dividend, a part of the company's profit, depending on the number of shares they owned. If the company does well, the value of stocks would rise. The investors may then choose to sell to make a profit or hold on to them with the hope that the value of the stock might continue to rise even higher, thereby allowing the stockholder to make even more money down the road. Canadians began investing in the stock market. Stocks were often bought on margin, meaning that stocks were bought with borrowed money. At that point, they would sell, repay the loan, and harvest a large profit. This is called speculating and resulted in massive inflation of stock prices. In Canada, bank presidents and business leaders strongly believed that Canadian economy depended upon international trade, particularly with strong wheat crops. Despite indications that the price of wheat was falling, investors and speculators continued to pour money into the stock market. Investors began to lose confidence in the companies they invested in, and eventually began to sell large volumes of stocks. The value of stocks dropped dramatically, and many stocks became worthless. The stock market could only sustain increased inflation for so long, and on October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed. This day is known as Black Tuesday. Many Canadians lost everything, especially those who bought on margin. Although few Canadians owned stock, millions were affected. Bankrupt companies became bankrupt individuals. There were huge losses of jobs, which led to high unemployment, and there were declines in prices due to the decline in consumer demands. In the 1935 election in Alberta, Social Credit Party led by William Aberhart won a landslide victory. He was voted in as premier in 1935. He was a Protestant minister and was referred to as Bible Bill. He was a charismatic preacher and a high school teacher in Calgary. He publicized the social credit theory in his weekly radio program, Voices of the Prairies. Social credit was based on the belief that capitalism was a wasteful economic system. Under capitalism, people hoarded money, preventing customers from buying the abundant goods that capitalism produced. The theory of social credit appealed to many people from Alberta because the Depression had devastated their economy, and they resented the power and control of the banks in central Canada. He felt that the government should release money into the economy so that people could spend it. He promised to fix the depression in Alberta and promised to give Albertans a $25 credit a month. The federal government challenged the right of a province to issue its own currency, and social credit was disallowed by the Supreme Court. Although it was popular, and it remained in power until 1971 under Aberhart's successors Ernest Manning and Harry Strong. As Ottawa struggled to find ways of coping with the Depression, some Canadians looked to alternative parties for solutions. The Cooperative Commonwealth Federation was formed in the West in 1932 and was a socialist party. It was also known as the CCF. It appealed to a wide variety of Canadians who were dissatisfied with the government's response to the Depression. They include farmers, laborers, socialists, intellectuals, and discontented liberals. It was led by J.S. Wordsworth. They believed in capitalism to blame for the Depression. Adapted the Regina Manifesto, the party stated its support for public ownership of key industries. They also supported social programs to assist people in need of money. The elderly, the unemployed, the homeless, the sick, and other citizens unable to support themselves. Ridding Canada of capitalism and establishing a socialist state, Wordsworth also urged the government to spend money on public works in order to create employment. The CCF became the New Democratic Party. It helped better distribution of wealth, but they still wanted to maintain democracy. Wordsworth was voted in as Premier of Saskatchewan in 1940. After the war, drastic lifestyle changes happened, not only for the soldiers who came from war, but as well as the women. The Great Depression had settled in and everyone lived in deprivation and poverty. Unemployment rates were sky high. Businesses and farms went bankrupt. The bank was too, in a sea of bad loans, as they were unable to pay their debt and loans. At least 25% unemployment was in the industrialized countries. Many relied on family for support, but usually their families was in the same dire situation. As more and more workers became unemployed, there was a greater decline in demand for goods, which deepened the depression. This led to increase in prices for products, and so people began to starve and suffer. This is what was called the business cycle, and many people sought help. Individuals at first began to try to sell products door to door. They panhandled. They would also try to hitch a ride on freight trains by trying to ride on top, inside, of open flat cars, or on top of timber or other products. Initially, people rode the rails in search of employment, but when there was none to be found, large numbers of single unemployed people moved back and forth across the country because they had nothing to do. Although the Canadian police tried to control the situation by catching and jailing transients, but had such little effect, the police eventually chased them half-heartedly. Many approached churches and charities for help. They drifted in search of employment, and as a last resort, they collected public relief, called dole or pogie, which came in the form of vouchers that could be exchanged for goods. This pogie was similar to modern-day welfare system. This government program provided vouchers for those who qualified, which then they could exchange for goods like food or other essential items. But it was kept lower than lowest-paying jobs, so it discouraged people from wanting to be on it. So the pogie did not help much. During hard times, entertainment was the only thing that temporarily gave relief, and people were able to forget the terrible and harsh life they were living in. They used cheap forms of entertainment like stamp collecting or board games. Monopoly was created during this time. The radio also became an important part of life in the 1930s because this allowed them to escape from reality for a bit, just like we do for TV today, as provided useful information and news about the changes in their country. There was also one famous story that gave Canadians in the 1930s to temporarily escape the economic woes. In 1934, 5 babies, quintuplets, were born near North Bay, Ontario. The Dion quintuplets were the first set of quintuplets to live for more than a few days. The government took over their welfare. After the babies' births, they were taken to nursery or hospitals to be cared by a special team of doctors and nurses. Later, the Ontario government built a road to the nursery that the quins were staying at so people could watch them play. As a result, it estimated that they brought in over $500 million for the tourist industry. They rarely got to see their parents, and so after a 9-year legal battle, the Quints were finally returned to their family. In the 1930s, a federal government election took place involving two major parties. R.B. Bennett led the Conservative Party, promising to help people who were suffering through the Depression, with the slogan of a chicken in every pot. Mackenzie King, the Prime Minister before the election at that time, led the Liberal Party. When the provincial governments asked for federal assistance over the matter of unemployment, King rejected them through his unwillingness to deal with the Depression. His slogan, "Not a 5-cent piece" for an conservative province, caused him a great loss against Bennett, thus giving away his title as Prime Minister. Under R.B. Bennett, the Conservatives won the election. During a radio broadcast, Bennett spoke, saying, "I am for reform," meaning a government control and regulations government intervention and the end of the laissez-faire, wait-and-see attitude of the Liberals. During the 1930s, Bennett's government offered Band-Aid solutions, such as soup kitchens, relief camps where unemployed men 20 cents per day with room and board, and paid relief, which is also known as the pogie or the dole. He also set up high tariffs to protect Canadian industries, thinking that other countries would lower their tariffs because they would need Canada's staple products. However, by 1935, only Britain had lowered its tariffs. In 1935, Prime Minister Bennett created the New Deal. The New Deal was introduced as the Canadian version of American President Roosevelt's New Deal. During a series of radio broadcasts, Bennett made a number of promises about progressive taxation, increased work hours, the introduction of minimum wage, firmer regulations on working conditions, an unemployment insurge program, a revised old age pension plan, agricultural support, a marketing board to regulate wheat prices, and health and accident insurance. The majority of the programs which were eventually initiated as a result of the Depression are the basis of what is called the modern social safety net, which help protect individuals and businesses in time of economic crisis. Although Bennett made such promises, a great amount of people felt that Bennett's response was too little, too late. Little help was given through the New Deal towards the problem of unemployment. And that's what happened in the 1930s.